If you were born somewhere between 1986 and 1995, there are a few things about you that probably never made sense. Not fully. You don't feel old, but you don't feel young either. You understand how the world works, but at the same time, something about it feels off. You remember life before everything was online, but now everything is, and somehow you're stuck in between, not completely comfortable in the past, not fully adjusted to the present. And if that feeling has always been hard to explain, this might finally put it into words. You grew up in a very specific window, not fully analog, not fully digital. You had to learn both. You remember calling people, not texting them. You remember boredom, real boredom, no endless scrolling, no constant stimulation. And because of that, your brain developed differently. You learned to sit with your thoughts. But now, you live in a world where no one does that anymore. And that creates a weird tension because part of you wants quiet, but another part is used to noise. One thing about people from this reign, you adapt fast, almost too fast. You learn to adjust depending on the situation. Different people, different version of you. At work, one tone. With friends, another. With family, something else. And you got good at it. So good that sometimes you're not even sure which version is the real one. You don't feel fake, but you do feel split, like you're constantly switching modes, and after a while, that gets exhausting. You probably overthink more than you admit, not in an obvious way, but in small moments, replaying conversations, thinking about how you sounded, wondering if something felt off. And here's something interesting. Studies showed that people who grew up during early internet adoption tend to be more socially aware, but also more self critical, because you were exposed to feedback, but not fully protected from it. You saw reactions, but you didn't grow up with tools to process them, so you built your own. Overthinking became one of them. There's another thing you probably don't talk about much. Decisions feel heavier than they should, even small ones. What to say, how to respond, whether to reach out or not. You don't just choose, you simulate outcomes. You think, how will this be perceived? What will this lead to? What if I regret it later? And it slows you down. Not because you're indecisive, but because you're aware, too aware of consequences. And that awareness quietly turns into pressure. You don't necessarily miss the past, but you miss how things felt. Conversations that didn't feel rushed, moments that weren't documented, connections that weren't filtered through a screen. And it's strange, because everything now is more convenient, faster, easier, more accessible, but somehow less satisfying, like something important got lost, but no one really talks about it. And one more thing you probably noticed: people changed. The way they talk, the way they connect, the way they show interest. Everything feels more controlled, more calculated, less spontaneous. And because you remember how it used to feel, you pick up on that difference immediately, even if you don't say it out loud. You just feel it. Something is missing, something is slightly off. You don't like fake interactions, you feel them instantly. Polite conversations, surface level talk, forced energy. You notice it, and it drains you because you remember what real connection feels like when people were actually present, not distracted, not performing, just there. And now, even when you're around people, it can still feel empty. There's also this quiet sense of responsibility. You don't always show it, but it's there. You feel like you should handle things, figure things out, keep things stable, even when no one asked you to. And that comes from how you grew up. You were expected to be mature, to understand, to adjust. So now, you carry more than you probably should. There's also this constant low level tension, not anxiety exactly, but something close to it. Even when things are fine, you don't fully relax. Your mind stays slightly active, scanning, thinking, anticipating. It's like a background process that never really turns off. And you've gotten used to it, so much that silence sometimes feels uncomfortable. Doing nothing feels strange, because your default state is processing. And when you finally slow down, oh, that's when everything you've been holding in starts to show up. And maybe the strangest part, you don't fully feel like you belong anywhere. You understand people, you adapt to them, you connect, but not completely. It's like you're always slightly outside, observing, understanding, but not fully inside. And that creates a quiet distance. Not loneliness exactly, but something close. But here's the thing, none of this is a flaw. It's just a pattern. You were shaped by a very specific time, a transition. And people who grow up in transitions tend to be more aware, more adaptable, more observant, but also more tired because you're constantly processing, constantly adjusting, constantly thinking. And maybe that's why a lot of things never fully made sense before, because no one really explained this part. Not clearly, but once you see it, you start understanding yourself differently. Not as someone who overthinks too much, but as someone who had to adapt early. So the next time you feel out of place or slightly disconnected, remember this. You were never supposed to fit perfectly. You were shaped in between. And that comes with both clarity and complexity. And if this felt a little too accurate, you're not the only one. Subscribe, because there are patterns like this that most people feel, but almost no one explains.